I'm in my late 60s, and I grew up in the Bronx. The Bronx isn't exactly known for supernatural activity, but I can tell you from living there for many years, a lot of strange things happen in New York, aside from the drug abuse and the crime that takes place in the back alleys. Let's go back in time to 1962. It was my 7th birthday. My grandmother got me this vintage Mattel Jack-in-the-Box. This was back when these kinds of toys were more commonplace. From the moment I opened the gift, I immediately got a bad feeling. Jack-in-the-Boxes are naturally creepy to some people, and I was never a fan of them, even as a kid. But I loved it when my grandmother came up from Brooklyn to visit us, and if I even hinted that I didn't like the toy she got me, my mother would have made sure I didn't sit down for a week. I don't know where my grandmother got this thing, but if I had to guess, she probably got it from one of the several pawn shops in the area. I think this is significant to point out, because this means that the toy was not bought brand new. It had a previous owner. After my birthday celebration was over, me and my dad put all of my presents in my room. I specifically remember setting the Jack-in-the-Box down in my toy chest. My family had this tradition where we would always gather in the living room and listen to some radio shows before going to bed. When 8 o'clock rolled around, I was told to brush my teeth and go to bed. When I was done in the washroom and went into my bedroom to turn in, I instantly noticed that the Jack-in-the-Box was now resting at the foot of my bed. I was confused because I remembered putting it away in my toy chest, but I figured that one of my parents might have been messing with me, so I placed the toy under my bed and tucked myself in. I ended up having these violent, horrifying nightmares over the next following weeks. I remembered seeing unspeakable things in my dreams. Everything is obscure to me now from the passing of time and my mind trying to block out certain things. But I'm confident that what I saw in my dreams was of a sexual nature. I would wake up screaming many times, to the point where my mother ended up taking me to the doctors to find out what was wrong. The doctors performed several tests on me and concluded that I was perfectly healthy and recommended that I be taken to a child psychologist. The night that I got back from the doctors was when this whole situation would reach its climax and conclusion. Maybe it's obvious to everyone listening to this what was going on, but at the time, I didn't really have a clue. I woke up that night, not from a nightmare, but from that feeling you get when someone is watching you. I had a nightlight plugged in next to my bed. In the dim light, I saw the Jack-in-the-Box my grandmother had gotten for me resting at the foot of my bed. That's when the unthinkable happened. It was like a scene straight out of a horror film. The crank on the side of the box slowly began to turn, and a distorted, slowed-down version of the melody began to play. When the tune finished, the clown inside the box popped out. Even though I saw it coming, it still made me jump. However, there was something else that I noticed that instantly made me forget all about the creepy little plastic clown. Recalling this now still makes my insides crawl. Looming just behind the toy box was a tall black figure. The only thing I could tell you about this shadowy presence is that it had these long horns on top of its head. I was raised Catholic, but I was never told at that point in my life about the fallen angel Lucifer, or his foot soldiers, commonly referred to as demons. My fragile little mind could not comprehend what I was witnessing, but I remembered my teachings about God's love and the power of prayer. So I closed my eyes and began to pray aloud. Shortly after I began my prayer, I heard a loud shrieking, as if I was inflicting pain to whatever was in my room. As soon as I opened my eyes, I saw that the figure was gone. The box that was still resting at the foot of my bed was now closed. We lived on the 3rd floor of an apartment building. Outside of my room was one of those stereotypical dark alleys New York City is known for. I opened up my bedroom window and hurled the box out. As soon as I threw it, I was expecting to hear it crash on the concrete below, but instead, I heard what can only be described as giant wings flapping. I didn't see anything, but I felt a gust of cold air hit me, and I quickly shut my window and ran back under the covers. I'm sharing my story to inform everyone that there are dark forces out there beyond our comprehension. You'll be surprised to hear that I'm no longer a part of any organized religion. I'm still a very spiritual person, and I do believe in a higher power. If you're confused by this, I'll try to break this down for you in the simplest of terms. Dark entities, like the one I encountered so many years ago, are comprised of energy, and they react to other energies in different ways. If you show fear in the face of adversary, they will feed off that fear and become stronger. If you show bravery and perform an act like prayer as a means to combat the presence, that is what ultimately drives them out. I believe wholeheartedly that you don't have to belong to a church or a certain religion to deal with an intruding presence. It was this event that inspired me to become both a counselor and a paranormal investigator. I have used my experiences with the paranormal to help many families across America. So if you ever encounter one of these dark spirits in your home, remember my words. Do not show fear, be brave, and make it clear that they are not welcomed. My name is Roberto Lopez. I grew up in Mexico City and relocated to Texas in 1998, where I got a job remodeling houses. The company I worked for was located in Texarkana, which is a city located between the Texas and Arkansas border. We would do jobs mostly on the Texas side, but we would often get contracts in the neighboring states of Louisiana and Oklahoma as well. Our workforce was comprised of mostly immigrants, including myself. However, I was the only one in my crew who could speak both English and Spanish. I quickly rose to a supervisor position because of this, and after a while, the owner of the company allowed me to go out and do jobs on my own. Ever since I was a child, I have been able to see things that most people can't. I've never invested much into the notion of the paranormal. Being from Mexico, my family were all devout Catholics and extremely superstitious. I'm not going to go into it too much, but I learned at a very young age to keep my mouth shut. Anyway, I got a call from my boss one early Saturday morning, and he told me that he needed me to head to a property in Oklahoma the next day. The owner had just bought the land and wanted an estimate on some repairs, so I made the 4-hour drive the very next day and pulled up to the address. As soon as I saw the place, it gave me the chills. Whenever someone says haunted house, you may picture an old 2-story home with shattered windows, cracked walls, and a roof that looks like it could collapse at any moment, a contractor's worst nightmare. This house checked all of those boxes. There was a rusted dual-swing entry gate, with one side lying on the ground, and the other barely holding on to its hinges. I parked my truck outside the gate, grabbed my flashlight and clipboard, and headed toward the old house. I was told that the owner had left the place unlocked for me, and I was free to walk around and take notes. The front door opened with a creak, loud enough to wake the dead. The house was in complete disarray. There were several holes in the floor and ceiling. Mold covered nearly every inch of the walls, and weeds were growing in the fucking living room. It also had that unpleasant smell of mildew from all the water damage. There was no telling how long this place had been abandoned for. In my honest opinion, the owner was better off bulldozing it and building a new one. I remembered that the only thing I wrote down was, "Everything is broken." Nevertheless, I figured I would look around anyway and give my boss all the details. There was a staircase that led to the second floor. On the wall to the left of the stairs, someone had wrote a message in black paint. "It lives upstairs." Whoever left this message looked like they did it in quite a hurry, and it certainly didn't help the creeped out feeling in my gut. As I mentioned before, I've always been sensitive to the supernatural, but unlike most people with this ability, I don't really make a big deal out of it. Do I see ghosts sometimes? Sure. When I was a kid, they really freaked me out, but after a while, I got used to it. Upon seeing the painted message and making my way up the stairs, I felt something that I had never felt before. When I got to the top of the stairs, it felt like I was in imminent danger. Something truly evil lived in this house. At the top of the stairs was a hallway. At the far end was a corridor with 2 doors on either side. I watched in absolute horror as the door on the right slowly opened and a dark figure emerged. When you encounter something unnatural and inhuman, its appearance is actually amusing at first. That's just your mind coping with something that should never be seen walking this earth. I remember letting out a chuckle before pure terror took over. The shape that stood in the hallway was pitch black with a surmounting pair of horns. Its upper half resembled that of a bodybuilder. However, there was something strange about its legs. It almost seemed like they were backward at first, but after a moment, I realized where its feet should be were a pair of hooves. The thing uttered an ear-piercing shriek. Causing me to topple backward down the steps. Once I landed at the bottom, I immediately scrambled to my feet, not caring about the pain, and I hauled ass back to my truck. After I got in and turned on the engine, I remembered seeing a dark shadow looking down at me from one of the upstairs windows. I drove back to my company's headquarters and informed my boss that the place was unsalvageable and the owner was better off tearing it down, which was the truth. But I left out the part about the demonic encounter on the 2nd level. To make a long story short, I needed this job, and my boss could be a real jackass sometimes, and I thought it was best to keep this incident to myself. Since that day, I have never encountered anything like that before, and I hope I never do again. Take my story for what it's worth. If you're skeptical, I'll tell you this. Until you experience it yourself, you'll have a hard time believing any of this. But I'm telling you, there are dark forces in this world, just waiting to be awakened. Back in February of 2001, my friend Jake invited me on a weekend trip to a remote cabin his uncle owned in northern Saskatchewan, and I agreed to join him. So we drove the long 6 hours from my house to get there. Let me give you a brief layout of the grounds before we continue. It was a small ranch-style cabin with a kitchen, 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, and a living room. There was no electricity or running water, and it was surrounded by forest on all sides. The only way in or out was down a long, unpaved driveway. We arrived around dusk. The next day, Jake and I walked around the forest to search for some firewood. About an hour into the walk, Jake spotted an old abandoned house in the distance. It was nestled among a group of trees. This was rather strange as we were in the middle of nowhere in northern Saskatchewan, and civilization was miles away. Jake wanted to check out the house, and although I was hesitant to tag along, I reluctantly accompanied him. We entered through a boarded-up window. Once inside, we were greeted by a musty smell. After roaming around for a bit, I noticed a door that led into the basement. Curiosity got the better of me, and against my better judgment, I opened the door and slowly made my way down the steps. Once I reached the bottom, I froze. There were dimly lit candles in a circular pattern, as if someone had been performing some kind of ritual. I pointed my flashlight across the basement floor to see if there was anyone hiding. but no one was there. After doing some exploring, I discovered that there was an empty alcove behind the stairs. As I made my way back to the steps, I saw something out of the corner of my eye, under the stairs, which had been clear just moments before. There was a black figure staring directly at me. I guess it had to have been at least 8 feet tall. Once I saw its eyes, I knew that I was in the presence of something inhuman. A pair of glowing red eyes stared back at me, full of hatred and malice. I then heard a low, repulsive growling. The kind of sound that makes you feel like you're about to be torn apart by a vicious animal. Without hesitation, I bolted up the stairs. Jake was still exploring the empty living room when I startled him. "We need to get the fuck out of here, now!" We left the same way we entered. Our story does not end there. When we finally returned to the cabin, I told Jake about what I saw, and to my surprise, he believed me. I didn't see anything myself, but the moment we entered that place, I felt that something evil lived there. I was feeling a bit creeped out myself before you came running up from the basement. We decided to put the whole thing behind us and try to get some rest. I suddenly woke up and checked my watch. The time was 2:17 a.m. Things were dark and quiet, but I felt that something was amiss. After a while, I heard subtle footsteps outside the bedroom door. That's when Jake woke up as well. What's going on? Shh. Listen. The footsteps became louder. I got up from my bed and made my way over to the bedroom door. I then cracked it to see what was outside. Chills were sent through my body. There was an intruder in the cabin, but it was not human. It was that same creature I saw in the basement of that abandoned house. The moonlight did not provide adequate illumination, but I saw the disturbing form twisting its head until its red eyes were looking back at the bedroom door. Or should I say, me. I slammed the door shut, locking it. In a panic, we both fled the cabin through the bedroom window, leaving all of our belongings behind. As we ran towards Jake's truck, we heard a very loud, ear-piercing scream. Jake frantically started the truck and floored it out of there. We remained silent the whole way home, not saying a word about what we saw. It's been nearly 20 years since this event, and Jake and I are still good friends to this day, but we have never returned to his uncle's cabin since. I don't know if what we saw that night was some kind of paranormal entity or an unknown creature living in the woods, but I don't plan on returning to find out.